If I live right by a highway, I would want the highway to be gone too.
That's radio. That's talk radio superstar Jason DeRusha explaining how he would want I-94 gone too if he lived near it.
The idea of filling in the highway and making it into a boulevard, which I find ridiculous.
That's the thing. None of the people who think this is a ridiculous idea would ever want to live next to it. And yet people have to live next to it. People with no choice but to live next to it, who didn't have a choice that it was built in the first place. Somebody's going to have to live next to this big polluting menace. And the idea that we're not even going to consider removal as one of the 5 options is kind of a scandal.
We're rolling. We're rolling.
This is a real thing. Real thing.
None of you have the balls to stop this. Stop this.
I've got plenty of time. I have nothing else going on today.
We're in the Wedge neighborhood right now.
Okay, this is the Wedge Live podcast. I'm your host, John Edwards. And today I'm going to start with a poem. It was the Friday before Christmas, and all through the house, MnDOT was announcing they were eliminating any consideration of replacing I-94 with an at-grade boulevard, because you always announce the things you're most proud of and have the best justification for on the Friday before Christmas. Alex Burns, Yasmin Hirsi from Our Streets, Minnesota. Did you enjoy my poem?
That was a great poem.
Thank you.
It's beautiful. Beautiful.
Your poem is a really great start to what exactly happened. MnDOT decided they wanted to announce their intention to remove the at-grade boulevard options. And they were doing this ahead of this upcoming Policy Advisory Committee meeting that's happening on January 17th by meeting with elected officials on the PAC individually to help sort of control reactions and the narrative ahead of the meeting. Yeah, it was really concerning to learn about this, and we've kind of been, working with community members and our coalition to try to organize some action since then. But this decision was a disappointing move and also not super surprising, and kind of speaks to the lack of transparency and sort of problematic tendencies of MnDOT as an agency, and the disregard for frontline community members who've been advocating for the at-grade option, and advocates who've been voicing concerns around the project and just have been very vocal about advancing project options that are going to serve their communities well.
So to make sure I understand the politics, they're just eliminating it as an option. It's not as though we're at the point where they would have decided what they're going to build, right? Do I have that correct?
Yeah. And maybe it's helpful to do a quick zoom out for your listeners here. So for those who haven't heard, MnDOT, the Minnesota Department of Transportation, is in the process of planning the future of I-94 between downtown Minneapolis and downtown St. Paul. And the highway's breaking down, so now we have to figure out what comes next for the next 60, 70 years. And they've been going through this process that is required by the National Environmental Protection Act. It's called an EIS, or an Environmental Impact Statement process, to determine which options they want to study, and then ultimately they'll narrow that down to one option that they want to build. And so dating back to 2023, MnDOT has been studying 10 options. 2 of them have been what we've been advocating for at Our Streets, and what a lot of people have been super excited for, that would turn the I-94 trench back into a community boulevard with dedicated bus lanes, protected bikeways, sidewalks. It would reconnect all the neighborhoods, and it would return the adjacent land for new uses like homes, businesses, parks, etc. MnDOT had 2 options that were that were like that. The rest of the options would rebuild the highway, either adding a lane, removing a lane, keeping the same amount of lanes. And now they're at this step of their process where they're going to narrow down those 10 options into 5 options that will continue to be studied. And so these options will get like a more, it won't just be a surface level analysis. Like they'll really go deep into the engineering. What would this cost? What are the pros? What are the cons? And what Yasmin is saying is exactly right. They tried to slip this through leading up to the holidays. And now what we've learned is the 2 boulevard options, in addition to 3 other project options, are being proposed to be eliminated from the process and won't be continued to be studied. And to your earlier question about when MnDOT will ultimately select an option, that probably won't happen for a couple of years.
So we're years away. We're just whittling it down to the 5 options. So when I hear about this, as somebody who's not following it super closely, you both are like intimately involved in this. It's your life, right? And so like it makes me think, are they scared of you? Have you been too effective? I know that's kind of a, like I'm a fellow traveler with you both on these issues, so we agree. So I'm wondering, like, are they scared? Have you been too effective? Is that just like a rosy reading of this on my part? Because otherwise, like, why not throw it in as one of the 5 options, right? And eliminate it later. Say, sorry, guys, we considered everything. We looked at it super close and decided it was the wrong way to go. Like, doing it the Friday before Christmas suggests they don't, like, you are too strong to stand on equal footing with the rest of the options.
I'm curious on your thoughts, Yasmin. I mean, I agree. I think they're not ready to have a real conversation about the pros and cons of these options. And we can get into that a little bit more about the metrics that they use to grade all these different options and the justification that they're using to eliminate them. But I think this is significant because, for example, if the boulevard options were continued to be studied, we would get a lot more information that we feel like would be favorable to our cause. It would do a more in-depth traffic analysis. We would look at how you could repurpose land, and a lot of the benefits of a boulevard conversion we feel like would stand out in that process. And so they're making bad faith arguments to prevent that conversation from even happening.
I have some audio to play, some old audio that I have from the last time you were here, Alex.
Okay.
If I live right by a highway, I would want the highway to be gone too.
That's radio. That's talk radio superstar Jason DeRusha explaining how he would want I-94 gone too if he lived near it. I have another one. I don't know what this one says. Let's listen to this one.
The idea of filling in the highway and making it into a boulevard, which I find ridiculous.
That's the thing. None of the people who think this is a ridiculous idea would ever want to live next to it. And yet people have to live next to it. People with no choice but to live next to it, who didn't have a choice that it was built in the first place. Somebody's going to have to live next to this big polluting menace. And the idea that we're not even going to consider removal as one of the 5 options is kind of a scandal.
For sure. Especially when the project's called Rethinking I-94, especially when the boulevard option scored the highest in MnDOT's own public engagement survey. And what they're doing is the same justification that was used to build the highway in the first place, which is the neighbors that live close to the highway, they're in a sacrifice zone where the health of them and their families and the people who live, work, go to school near the highway are deemed as an acceptable trade-off for shaving 5 to 10 minutes off people's commute times. And that's really what it boils down to. And I think Jason summarizes that hypocrisy perfectly in his comments.
Did either of you read the Streets MN post? Did that appear today or recently? I just read it today, where Charlie Zelli, who was the former commissioner of MnDOT, said about I-94, we could never build that kind of atrocity today. Like the planning consensus about urban interstates is that are awful. We should never have done it. We will never do it again. And yet it's seen as this like pie in the sky leftist radical dream to remove it and replace it with an actually appropriate surface street for a major U.S. city.
That's the point, right? There isn't anything super radical about wanting neighborhoods to be reconnected and to address the air and water quality that communities that are living along the highway get to experience, and asking for opportunities to address the disparities and the gap in opportunity to own and purchase homes and build generational wealth. I think there's just so much that the highway has taken away from tens of thousands of people that is like very real. And so people are asking, community members and advocates and, even elected officials who sit on the PAC are asking for MnDOT to challenge the status quo and to think of project options that are going to be addressing these concerns in a real, tangible way, and not just provide lip service and say that you don't want to repeat the past mistakes, but then you go and do this, and you try to sneak in project options that are contradictory to what you say you stand for, and disregard the voices of communities that have been advocating for something that is going to address the disparities and reach some of these equitable goals that MnDOT and the state and the cities and county are asking for. So there's just a few things that are contradictory and does not address the mistake that was caused and the harm that was caused by building I-94 through a predominantly Black and brown communities. And today, when we talk about who is bearing that burden, I mean, it is those communities that have been marginalized and have experiences of disproportionate impact from highway pollution. There's statistics of like folks that are living in Elliott Park and East Rondo have life expectancies that are over a decade shorter than those that are living in the Twin Cities, outer cities and neighborhoods and communities. And so there's a lot of real concerns for the impact and what kind of message this is sending to community members who are living near the highway when we say that we are not interested in pursuing alternatives that are actually addressing some of these impacts. And is going to set in stone, for the next generation. Once this decision is made, the next generation is going to inherit this infrastructure, and it's going to be one that is going to be really harmful to them as well. So there is a lot of contradiction around what MnDOT is saying that they want to do, and the apologies that were made to the Black community in Rondo versus what is happening today.
Yeah. And it's not even, we're not going to make it one of the 5 potential things we will study over the next couple of years. That's what they're saying. The only thing that will eliminate, we had this debate over the garbage burner in Minneapolis. And when you compare the amount of poison that is put into the air between the garbage burner and the interstate is far and away the big polluter. That's what is making people sick, and what is causing life expectancies to go down in the surrounding neighborhoods. And I don't know, Alex.
Yeah, the irony is that when you look into the talking points that MnDOT is using and the scoring, they go through this evaluation process where they score each of the project options based on these different metrics. The boulevard option scored lowest for pollution. And
okay, hold on, Alex. Hold on. You sent me these talking points, and I couldn't believe what I was reading. These are MnDOT talking points that you sent me?
Yeah, this is leaked.
Let me go through the parts. I couldn't believe what I was reading. So removing the interstate, and these are not direct quotes, but I'm just communicating what their core points are. Removing the interstate will create more pollution, will create more dangerous traffic crashes and situations for all users. And of course it will worsen traffic congestion. But explain to me how they come to this idea that it will increase pollution, that it will make the streets more dangerous. Because that's
Yeah.
astonishing to me.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's this kind of gaslighting where they're taking the primary benefits of removing highways, benefits that have been documented dozens
Yes.
of times in completed projects, and they're flipping them to say, well, actually, that's going to be the opposite. That it's going to make pollution worse. It's going to make safety worse. It's going to make economic vitality worse. And this is something that tries we tried, and many people have tried to raise red flags about months ago, in looking at the metrics that MnDOT was using to evaluate the different project options. In May, a bunch of elected officials sent MnDOT a letter saying the way that you're going about evaluating these different project options is wrong. And it's not prioritizing the things that we care about. It's not prioritizing the things that we're hearing from our constituents. And you're kind of gaming this process to rebuild the status quo. And we need to fix this before it's too late. And so MnDOT's response to that letter was basically, thanks but no thanks, and they didn't do anything. And now they're using those same metrics to justify only moving forward with options that rebuild the highway. So, for example, like for pollution, MnDOT is using the argument that because a boulevard would fill in the trench, it would raise it up to surface level, and traffic would be moving slower on average than freeway traffic. There's this kind of outdated thinking that freeways are good for pollution because they keep the traffic flowing. And if you compare a car moving at 60 miles per hour versus a car that's like idling, yes, the idling car pollutes more. But what they're not considering is that the volume of traffic is significantly lower on a boulevard overall than on a freeway. And so that's why freeways are super loud and they're super polluting, because you're concentrating all that traffic in the same place. And this has also been debunked, because even if you're sitting at a stoplight, for example, most new cars today have an automatic shutoff feature. They're becoming more efficient. We're having more electric cars in our fleet. And so this has been disproven. But I think really what it boils down to is all these metrics are just traffic metrics. Economic vitality, the way they're measuring economic vitality is the ability for people to drive through the corridor. The way they're evaluating pollution is how much vehicle delay there will be. The way they're evaluating racial equity is also how fast people will be able to drive through the corridor. They don't believe that, it's kind of the one more lane will fix it mentality. Like,
Right.
they believe that adding more lanes to the highway will reduce traffic. Reducing lanes on the highway is going to make it a lot worse.
So I don't want to compare Lyndale Avenue and Hennepin Avenue to I-94. Obviously, those are two different things. But like, there were predictions of doom and gloom when they went from 4 lanes to 3 on Lyndale, when they reduced Hennepin to 1 lane each way through the uptown area. The Hennepin Avenue is halfway finished. I don't see congestion as a problem on the phase 1 that they finished. Lyndale Avenue is functioning fine with 1 lane each direction, down from 2. I don't know, these theories, we've tested them. We've heard from Hennepin County, for example, on Lyndale, that it was impossible to take it from 4 lanes down to 3. And it worked out just fine. Like, you guys hired, Our Streets Minnesota hired a consultant group to study traffic, real professionals. The fix wasn't in. These are real professionals who looked at this. Like, can you talk about some of the findings from that study that maybe would convince people who are skeptical of this?
Yeah, I would say that report was really helpful in answering some of the key questions that we get often around like the Twin Cities Boulevard and the feasibility of it. And one of the things that we had learned is I-94 is actually not serving the intended purpose of interstate highways. Most of the trips that are happening are actually local trips and they're short. and that this highway is a very harmful, wasteful sort of way to accommodate some of these trips that are happening locally, which means that we need to be investing in other modes of transportation that is going to allow for residents, especially those who don't own vehicles, to be able to get around without having to use the highway. And so it's not actually doing the thing that it was intended to do. And then I think the other thing that we talk a lot about is how repurposing the right of way that the High Lane currently occupies would have significant economic impact and benefit to the communities that are surrounded by the highway, which would mean new housing, businesses, parks, and growing the local tax base. Currently, the highway takes up, I think, 366 acres of right of way, and the report estimated that 89, it would be between 86 to 96 acres that could be reused for community needs via the boulevard conversion. And so there's estimates of potentially 2,200 new affordable housing units being built as a result of that, 2,450 permanent jobs being created, and a real estate value of up to $470 million, which could be created as a result of the conversion. So there is an opportunity for Minnesota to kind of set a national standard and to make this decision to invest in its community and prioritize outcomes that, will address the inequities that a lot of the communities surrounding the highway currently experience, whether it's air, climate, or even housing, and kind of committing to and just really doing a service to the communities that have been harmed, like Rondo and Cedar Riverside, to address potential reparative justice and reparations for those that have been slighted as a result of this highway being constructed through the neighborhood. So it's not serving what it was intended to be used for. A lot of those trips are local trips and can be substituted for with a bus lane, and having a dedicated bus lane that will be able to get people to their destination a lot quicker and more safely, and also repurposing the highway to build more public housing that is much needed in the Twin Cities.
So I was reading that Bill Lindeke article in MnPost about I-94 and like the way traffic engineers get their models wrong or have done so in the case of I-94, like it not factoring in the idea of bottlenecks, like the Lowry Tunnel. Like that's not changing. That's not going anywhere. There's only a certain number of cars that can make it through that tunnel, and that feeds into I-94. And also the idea that like people go out of their way to use 94 for local trips. So they're driving longer distances because Google Maps tells them this is a shorter trip. I think that was in Bill Lindeke's piece. Alex, can you talk about some of the ways MnDOT is getting this wrong?
Yeah, for sure. I think those are some of the main takeaways from the engineers that looked into MnDOT's modeling. That MnDOT's modeling is always wrong, and it's always wrong. There's never any accountability. For example, when they go and expand a highway and they forecast, congestion is going to be so bad if we don't do this project, and then they go back and they never go back and look, are we getting the benefits that we said that these hundreds of millions of dollars would create? And that was the main takeaway from the engineers that we worked with. MnDOT their modeling is not robust enough to consider all the different ways that people's travel behavior would change if we significantly change the freeway. For example, Yasmin mentioned about a third of the land, if we converted I-94 into a boulevard, could be turned into new things, new homes, new businesses, employment opportunities, community centers, parks, etc. That is going to place a lot of the things that people need to access in their daily lives much closer to them within their neighborhoods. So that's going to have a significant impact. Like maybe people will continue to drive, but a lot of their trips might be shorter now. They might be able to live closer to work. High-speed transit completely changes the equation. If people need to commute to the downtowns or along the corridor. And over a quarter of the people along I-94 don't have access to a car anyways. So that's a major impact of that. And then also, we know that induced demand, which is if you make it easier to drive, more people will drive and they'll drive more often. If that is true, the opposite has to be true. If you make it more difficult to drive,
Well, there
less
you
people
go again,
will drive.
Alex. There you go again, making it more difficult to drive.
Yeah, exactly. But it will make it marginally more difficult to drive, but that will incentivize people to explore other uses, other modes, other commuting times. And what we've seen consistently over and over again is that people figure this out. And MnDOT's traffic model is essentially assuming that none of that will happen, that all 145,000 trips a day will just spill over onto all these little side streets, and people are just going to be going stop sign to stop sign, clogging up neighborhoods. And that has never happened.
Right.
Like in California, when they were proposing to remove the Central Freeway in San Francisco, the Caltrans, their DOT, predicted it would add 2 hours each way to commute times. And of course, that never happened. And so I think to your earlier point, what is MnDOT scared of? That article that you mentioned, MnDOT acknowledged that they're going to be doing a more comprehensive traffic analysis that considers the things we've been asking them to do in the next phase of the process. So if the boulevard options aren't included, we're never going to see that data that we feel like will be a lot more accurate on how people will respond.
So explain to me why it's not a good way to design a transportation system to encourage people who live in Wisconsin to like commute to work in Edina. Like, why is that bad?
There's layers to it. I would say we tried to ground this argument on the impacts to people's daily lives. And what are the things people care about? They care about an affordable lifestyle. They care about safety and the health of them and their community. And I think that, like running a freeway right through the heart of our community incentivizes urban sprawl, and it incentivizes inefficient land use that, if you look at it from the perspective of a Minneapolis or St. Paul resident, we're subsidizing wealth and investment moving out of our communities into the suburbs and into Wisconsin even. And for people to live out there and then just to speed through our communities, polluting the neighborhoods that they're running through, they're not stopping at any of those local businesses. I guarantee that. That's another argument MnDOT likes to use. They're not going along University and this
is not economic development for neighborhoods along I-94. It's just not.
No, yeah, for sure. And so a lot of the boom in urban sprawl that happened was followed the construction of interstate freeways. And so why should people care? Why is that not a good way? Well, it costs people more money to get around. We all end up, breathing worse air quality. It's the number one contributor of climate change. And it just makes it more difficult to access the things that we all need to access. And we have this blank canvas of this highway corridor that we could reimagine to actually benefit us instead of harming us. And that's really the core issue at the heart of the future of I-94.
If I lived right by a highway, I would want the highway to be gone too.
Can't say it any better than that.
Like if we were starting from scratch, we would not build I-94 today. If we believe everything that our transportation department says, we would not do it again. And I don't understand why people can't get over because they're used to it. They can't get over not having it anymore. That feels radical. But we wouldn't do it if we were starting from scratch. At least we could do is study the idea of removing it so you can explain to us clearly why that's such a crazy idea. And the fact that they're lying to us about the pollution being worse, lying about how traffic crashes would get worse if we removed it. Those are so obviously lies that I have to discount everything else they're saying when they're telling ridiculous lies like that. So the Sean Daniel Hayford O'Leary tweet. Are you guys familiar with Sean Daniel Hayford O'Leary? The Richfield council member? Okay. No offense to council member Sean. So here's what I said. I said the only reason we ever move the needle on streets and transportation in this city is because of people who started nearly vertical uphill battles. As I get older, I'm more convinced that organizing for the impossible in these cases is the right thing and more effective. That was actually my response to him. What he had said originally was time to stop messing around with an idea that's such an uphill battle it might as well be vertical. Let's unite behind a plan that would support transit, reduce VMT and emissions, and reduce the footprint of 94, reduced freeway. So he's advocating for like a middle ground, reduced freeway, and saying, stop wasting our time with your pie in the sky idea. So, like, why is he wrong? Why not immediately surrender, move to the middle ground position, make it a little smaller, ameliorate some of the harms? Like, I guess my question for him is like, what is the harm in pushing the envelope, right? I don't know. I'm answering my own question, guys.
Yeah.
Do you ever?
No, I'm glad you brought that up.
I guess I think my perspective is that there's a real harm that is currently being caused. MnDOT launches this Rethinking I-94 project to say that they want to hear from community members about what should happen with this highway. They're going to decide, they're going to make a decision on the results and just kind of the input that they hear from community members, and just want to be able to address some of the wrongs of the past. And so knowing that transportation is the highest green gas emission sector in Minnesota, or greenhouse gas emission sector in Minnesota, and recognizing that there is a rapid emergency around addressing climate impact and mitigating some of the harms that are caused as a result of air pollution, noise pollution, and recognizing that there's designated environmental justice communities, it would make sense to think about real solutions that are going to result in real progress for some of these communities that have been extracted from, that have been disenfranchised as a result of decisions being made for them. And so when you launch this project and you hear from communities, and there's a community proposal to convert the freeway into a boulevard that is going to serve the needs of these community members, it is really disheartening to see that the result, or just sort of the reaction, is to be scared and to be caught up in the feasibility of it, despite us working with, professional engineers who are helping us answer some of those questions, and saying that we want an opportunity for MnDOT to study this intentionally, to dig into those questions of reparations and what does that mean for folks whose homes and businesses were lost to make way for this freeway. And instead of really doing the intentional work to study it, MnDOT is already removing it from the table. And to be very honest, I mean, the reason why it was on the table to begin with, the reason why this was an option to begin with, was because community members rallied and they door knocked. They reached out to elected officials. Like, it was because of community that this was an option. And so I have a lot of faith that it is going to take community to help us organize and to mobilize as many people as we can to get this back on the table. And we're already hearing from elected officials who maybe didn't think that this was a possibility, are changing their minds and are advocating for at least the opportunity to study it. At the latest PAC meeting, we heard from Mayor Carter, who specifically asked for the at-grade options to be studied and is interested in learning more about that. And that's because of community organizing. And so there's a real chance for us to do something meaningful here. And it would be a waste of resources. It would be a waste of people's time and just community effort to disregard this before we even intentionally study it. And not to mention just like a disregard for the people's will. I mean, a lot of people positively respond to the ad grade options, and it's because it holds um, some real value to like make some of these changes in a tangible way. It could impact people's lives in a very tangible way. We were talking about more public housing, more jobs, more opportunities, more greenery space. Um, Spending some time in Cedar Riverside, I hear directly from a lot of young people and community members in that community who talk extensively about what it means to be confined to this small neighborhood that has lack of access to greenery space, and how community members and young people are after or seeking after just more spaces to be and to exist and to just gather. And we're talking about something that's kind of right there in their backyard that has that potential. And MnDOT is not hearing that. They're not considering it, and they're disregarding those voices that are asking for something better.
So I remember being one of those armchair skeptics, not because I was opposed to what you were doing, but like, Alex, do you really want to like embark on this impossible journey? I remember thinking those things. I don't know if I said them explicitly to you, but like the only reason things change is because people demand things that a lot of people thought were unreasonable. And like, I don't even think council member Sean from Richfield is necessarily like the enemy here and is in opposition to ameliorating some of these harms. But like the smart guy armchair skeptic, where you're like, oh, why are those people even bothering with this, is so irritating. Like you're not helping. What have you ever done to make things better compared to the people who are out there like every day trying to change things with our streets? I'm done with the armchair skeptics, even though I am one.
No, I think you said it really well. You both said it really well. And yeah, I think the biggest enemy to solving our problems, I don't think is, I think it's cynicism. And it's just this feeling that people are like, well, nothing's ever going to change. Why even try? And that's the thing that we encounter sometimes when we're talking to residents. And I think making bad faith arguments is harmful to that, because it kind of reinforces this idea that we can't deal with the problems that we're facing. So why even try? And this is like a movement, it's a vision, it's a campaign that's given a lot of people hope that we don't have to just accept the way that things are. We can create intersectional movements that address a lot of the issues that our community is facing. And we don't have to settle for just incrementalism and symbolic wins. And I think that if we're never going to seriously solve the issues, whether it be transportation or anything else that our community is facing, if we're not willing to first have honest conversations about the root of those problems. And what some of the people that are, the armchair skeptics like to do is poke holes, but they're not really interested in engaging with the legitimate dialogue about, like, okay, yes, there's questions we still need to figure out. We need to figure out, we need to have a definitive answer about cost, about construction phasing, about gentrification. Those are things that we're working on, but it's not, it kind of comes off as they're not really interested in having that dialogue and building that solution together. It's more of just kind of batting down ambitious solutions to settle for something that might move the needle a little bit, but certainly not at the scale that our community needs right now.
If I lived right by a highway, I would want the highway to be gone too.
That's right, Jason DeRusha. So what is next politically? Like, they've removed it as an option. I imagine you were talking to elected officials. Is there any hope that it gets re-added as an option?
Yes, for sure. I think that's the biggest thing we want people to know is all hope is not lost. we're sounding the alarms because of it's a big moment in this campaign and in this project, but it's not over. MnDOT's decision won't technically be final even until like the end of the summer of 2025. So there's going to be additional meetings, there's going to be additional comment periods. But really what we're pushing for is this January 17th meeting. There's going to be a public comment period. So if people are able to attend and testify, that's going to be a really important opportunity to make your voice heard. And if you can't, or if you can, contacting elected officials and asking them to demand that this option be restored is the biggest thing that people can do. We've seen public statements from both Minneapolis and St. Paul City Council members come out in recent weeks calling for that, and they hold a lot of power. Everyone holds a lot of power. You know, this is a public process, so all hope is not lost, and that's what we're going to be pushing for the next few weeks.
I was just going to add for what's next. We really want to encourage folks to reach out to the commissioner, Commissioner Daubenberger, and the governor. Ultimately, the commissioner is going to be accountable to the governor, you know, and we want to be able to ask people to reach out and to apply as much pressure to save the boulevard option and ask that they put the community's needs first. Join that PAC meeting on the 17th and let MnDOT know your exact thoughts. Like Alex mentioned, they are going to hold a public comment period, which again, MnDOT tried to remove the public comment period in previous meetings, and now it's being reinstated as public pressure as part of a campaign to highlight that this is undemocratic. And so this will be an opportunity for those who have been engaging with the project or just have thoughts to share to come out and speak that directly to elected officials on the PAC. And then our team is hosting a series of door knocks in January. That would be an opportunity for folks to join us at the doors. Now more than ever, we do really need to mobilize as many residents as we can so that MnDOT isn't ignoring people and they have no choice but to listen and to face our communities. I'll share more details about that. Folks can join us at the doors. And then to Alex's point, reaching out to the elected officials is going to be really crucial. Minneapolis and St. Paul have some sort of leverage in this process. They can deny municipal consent if it comes down to it before a major highway project can begin construction, but we're hoping that it doesn't get to that point.
Yeah, I had heard about the public comment thing, and then also like not wanting the members of the PAC who are elected officials in their own right, not wanting them to vote yes or no on resolutions, which is usually a thing that you can do when you're on an advisory body like that.
Yeah, the rabbit hole goes deep in terms of
like they're afraid, they're scared, they're running scared.
They are, yeah. This last year, now they're allowing public comment, but during at least the last two project meetings, they've eliminated public comment, they've disabled the chat, and then they came out right away. The commissioner, the first thing she did was she read a slide that said, you are here basically to answer the questions we ask of you, but you can't introduce resolutions. You're not a voting body. You're not a decision-making authority. And ultimately, MnDOT's going to have the final say over this project, which is crazy because even if that is the case and MnDOT's the final authority, like to your point, there's so many advisory committees that they can, have things noted on the record and make formal resolutions. Right.
And the advice is we voted on this resolution. Here's our advice.
Right. Take it or leave it. Yeah, exactly. And so there needs to be some accountability, from the commissioner and from the MnDOT staff that love to say all the right things. The fact is they are replicating the same process that was used to stifle community dissent when I-94 was built, while rebranding it as a process to repair that harm. And I don't want to mince words. I think that's shameful, to be honest. And we're hoping that people will become aware of that and that elected officials will hold them accountable in January.
So you mentioned disabling the chat. Somebody's going to have to disable my soundboard because...
If I live right by a highway, I would want the highway to be gone too.
Yasmin, did I cut you off? You had some things to add there.
To Alex's point and your point, I mean, MnDOT is kind of responsible in perpetuating some of this harm, and is it needs to recognize some of these things that it's doing to continue to make this decision making process inaccessible. I mean, this upcoming PAC meeting is happening at 9:30 a.m. I just don't know who can attend. Like, working class folks cannot attend a meeting in the morning, or during the week, and just like, it is not the most accessible space. They try to make these meetings as confined as possible to um, only hearing from them, and for elected officials to not even have much of a say in the process and or exercise their leverage as elected officials to make decisions. And it is really problematic and is perpetuating some of those harms, and helping maintain some of those like structures of white supremacy that we see within these types of agencies, and disregarding frontline communities and their voices, which, again, you launched a whole project to say that you want to address the harms caused by 94 and not repeating those mistakes, yet here we are, almost half a century later doing the same exact thing.
I hesitate to ask this question. We're so late in this podcast episode, but like, how are they ameliorating the harms if they're just going to rebuild I-94? Like, they're just going to do some tweaks with some exit ramps? Like, what is the amelioration? Quickly.
That's that's the question, right?
$1 million question.
Yeah, that's what I would ask Councilmember Sean and these people who are like, it's like we're going to put up some murals and we're going to, increase bus frequency and do the things that they should have done decades ago for sure. But we can do so much better than that. This is whatever happens. This is another take-home message. It's going to be $1 billion+ project. And so what do we want to invest that money in? Our tax dollars in, like, rebuilding the same or actually improving people's lives? And I would press people advocating for the status quo to answer that question of how that's rethinking anything.
I want you both to dig deep and think about this question for a moment. What is the most irritating argument against replacing I-94 with a Twin Cities Boulevard? What is the thing opponents say that bothers you the most, that gets under your skin?
I mean, there's a there's a lot, but I think there's good faith arguments and questioning, and then there's some that just don't make any sense. One question that we get asked is like people concerned about transit access, and they're like, and this is something that MnDOT has perpetuated too, but this argument that filling in the highway trench and building a new dedicated BRT line will somehow make transit access worse, because like the bus is not running on a freeway and it's going to have to stop at some stoplights and stuff like that. It doesn't make any sense really when you think about it. When you look at the ridership of the I-94 bus and you think about the potential to having buses running like, every 5-10 minutes in the dedicated lane with signal priority, with a bunch of new homes and businesses along them, that has the potential to significantly improve transit access for folks. And I don't like that argument gets used, especially by like MnDOT people who never care about transit ever. And then all of a sudden they like to use that as like the red herring to justify the freeway, which 99% of the vehicles are personal automobiles and trucks, and transit is just like thrown in there to justify that solution. So that's one that I think is just particularly in bad faith, and they don't give a crap about transit riders or that issue at all.
Yasmin?
I feel like the question of just like why we're proposing this, concern about why even try, I think it's the right thing to do, and it is important that we talk about, when we are proposing sustainability options or just kind of trying to address some of these root problems in our communities, like climate justice and environmental justice, like that we explore real options that community members not only want support, but are interested in learning more about. And I think that change is really hard and it's really unfathomable to a lot of people who drive to see a highway go away, but it is something that has to be set by example and has to be led by educating people and allowing people to engage with it in a very meaningful way that allows people to talk about and just ask more questions and to question things in a way that is like just from a lack of understanding, if that makes any sense. I think there is like, because we're such a car centric society and like our culture is very car dependent, and there's a car dependency culture here, it's very hard for people to imagine a society that is like getting rid of a freeway, but we have seen it happen successfully in other parts of this country. We have a lot of examples that we can refer to, that we can learn from. But at the end of the day, it's also just the right thing to do because we paved through Black and brown communities to make room for this highway. And now we're at a point and a juncture where we're deciding what to do with this freeway. Not only do we have a feasible option that would address some of these concerns, but it is going to give an opportunity for people who have been harmed to benefit from the decision that will be made as a result of MnDOT's Rethinking I-94 project. So I guess that I hope that answers your question. It's not, it's kind of a big picture question, but just the fact that it is just the right thing to do and we have an opportunity to do it meaningfully and well. And we just have not done enough to do, when I say like the agency has not done enough to engage all the communities that should be engaged and the residents. And we've been working against the clock to try to do that as much as we can.
Yeah, I share your irritation because I have nothing but gratitude for Our Streets, Minnesota, for forcing us to have this conversation that we would not be having otherwise. Like, we were having this conversation because of the work you do to force the issue. And like the irritation from the armchair skeptics that were called, that's a euphemism for Councilmember Sean. The irritation is just like, you'd really rather not be having this conversation, because we wouldn't be having it without your work. So thank you both, Alex Burns, Yasmin Hirsi from Our Streets, Minnesota. This has been the Wedge Live podcast. I'm your host, John Edwards. Thank you for listening.
This is a real thing. Real thing.
None of you have the balls to stop this. Stop this.
I've got plenty of time. I have nothing else going on today.
We're in the Wedge neighborhood right now.